course, it is less than a fortnight now, in England at least, until the so-called Freedom Day. And as you might have noticed, I can't wait. But as these freedoms fast approach, there are more and more voices warning against lifting the restrictions. Lifting the restrictions, of course, will lead to more cases. And the Health Secretary even has said that infections could rise above 100,000 a day by the summer. Chief Medical Officer Professor Chris Whitty says that these cases could mean long COVID, especially for the young. And the former head of the Royal Society, Sir Paul Nair, says that more infections could lead to a vaccine-resistant variant. Do you see my point, by the way, that I was saying? It's just constant doom and gloom, isn't it? Anyway, the Health Secretary yesterday said that people who are double jabbed don't need to isolate if they come into contact with a positive COVID case, but only after August the 16th. Now, joining me to discuss this is Dr. Bharat Pankhania, a Lib Dem counsellor and senior clinical lecturer at University of Exeter, and also Dr. Sean Favour, consultant in emergency medicine at Lincoln County Hospital. Good evening to you, gentlemen. Dr. Bharat, let me start with you. What is your concern about lifting these restrictions?
Well, lifting these restrictions in the manner in which they are being lifted is akin to going downhill without a foot on the brake pedal. And the inconvenience of wearing masks is minimal compared to the protection it affords in certain places. I'm not asking for masks to be worn out there in the open air in public places where there is plenty of free air and fresh air. But in crowded indoor places, there is ample evidence to indicate that wearing such masks protects and prevents infections. Buses, trains, tubes, crowded places, such places do need infection control measures. Similarly, in the schools, there is none of the infection control measures that we would like a proper plan for ventilation, a proper plan for air filtration, a proper plan for monitoring carbon dioxide, a proper plan for immunization of children. All that is happening now is go back to school, all will be well. How can that be possibly well?
Dr. Favour, what do you say to that? Is this too soon? Do you share the concerns of Dr. Pankhania there?
No, I don't. I don't share them on a couple of points. I think the first point that I wanted to put across is, medicine is never always about sort of the treatment and the intervention. We have to balance the harms of what we do with the benefits of what we do. Every intervention that we put into place has a benefit, and every intervention has a harm. And we put these interventions into place during the peak of a pandemic. And I think that was a good balance of risks. But now that the pandemic seems to be fading, the death rate is far lower, we're over this second peak, it seems to me that the harms of lockdown and wearing masks don't seem to be considered with the right balance. So I actually think, harms such as a downturn of economy, loss of jobs, loss of small business failure, undiagnosed cancers, increased mental health problems. Some people have actually lived the last year of their life locked down, not being able to see their family. These harms are immense, and I don't think that things are being balanced. And I take on board some of the concerns about releasing lockdown and that we might have more cases. But let's look at the harms of what's happening, and let's have a little bit of balance. I don't think that we've reached balance.
Yeah, Dr. Pankhania, let me just pass that back to you. We talk there about harms and balance. You're talking about even more kind of constraints, restrictions on school children. School children, by the way, I don't need to remind you, are very unlikely to become seriously ill from this virus anyway.
Michelle, you should know better, and I repeat, you should know better. I haven't said all those things that you think I have said. I said, right? With respect to children, we need to immunize. That's what I said. And furthermore, the reason for immunizing is as follows. It is not only about them not having severe illness, therefore you don't immunize. If that was the case, why are we immunizing against seasonal influenza? We do immunize against seasonal influenza and similarly against SARS-CoV-2 so that they don't get the infection, so that maybe in this case, they don't also get long COVID, for which we know nothing about what it means to have long COVID. Furthermore, we all know that school children are mixing bowls for generating infections, passing it on to older age groups, and then they go on to get more severe illness. Therefore, it is important to address the issues of infections in school children because they've always been a mixing bowl. To just wipe it off and say it doesn't matter is not the right way forward. Furthermore, I must emphasize, counter what my colleague has said. I am not in favor of restrictions. What I am saying is I am in favor of infection control measures. I don't want people to be restricted. I don't want our lives to be miserable, but I do want proper infection control measures in places where it matters. Buses, trains, tubes, crowded places. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about maintaining and keeping infection restrictions forever.
But no one suggested that you were. I didn't sit and say that you were suggesting keeping infection controls forever. That's not what I said.
Michelle, you said this guy prefers to keep the restrictions going. And I'm saying I never said I want restrictions to keep on going.
Well, it's my view that you do. It's my view that my personal view.
Yeah, we can agree to disagree, Michelle.
Of course, no problem with that. School children, in my view, have had absolutely... Dr. Favell, you talk here about the balance between essentially risk versus benefit. You know, school children in particular, they have been absolutely battered with what I would call these ridiculous notions of in school 1 minute, out of school the next minute. You know, the whole year group getting taken out of school because one pupil has a positive test. I find it absolutely ridiculous. You know, I have a niece in school that wasn't even allowed to have happy birthday sang to her because, someone somewhere might spread COVID by singing happy birthday. I find it ridiculous. And I am with you, Dr. Favell, that it is a risk balance measure.
Hey, hold on a minute. I haven't said that that what has been going on in the schools is the right thing. What I am saying, please, listen to what I am saying, which is we need to address ventilation, air filtration, carbon dioxide monitoring, and immunization of children. What system we had at present in the schools has been ridiculous. I agree with you.
Dr. Favell, you're listening. I mean, Dr. Pankhania is suggesting no one's listening to him. You're listening to him and you're a doctor. So what's your view?
Well, my view is first of all, I think my colleague has said, we have to have these things. We need to do that. But you'd have to show me the evidence that says we definitely have to do those things. Another thing that he mentioned was we just don't know. We just don't know. And this could happen and we just don't know. And I think that's a rhetoric that's used a lot. It's kind of almost, I think, a little bit of fear mongering. And we shouldn't necessarily be taking action based on things that we just don't know. We just don't know that we're not going to have an extinction event from a meteorite happening next year. But I'm not going to do things now just in case that happens. So I think we need to do things about the things that we do know. And we do know that morale in the country, I believe, is generally low. As I said, mental health problems are on the increase. There's a lot of harms being caused by these things. And there's not much evidence to me that a lot of these restrictions, if they continue, will actually have a major benefit. So as I said, in the middle of the pandemic, when we're looking at the balance of risks, when there was a lot of deaths, a lot of infection rates, then I was very much in favour of these infection control systems that were put in place. But now infection rates are very, very low. The balance tips the other way.
And do you think that's fair, Dr. Pankhania? We're talking about the balance tipping the other way. You're mentioning about going down hills with brakes on. How do you know, to the first doctor's point there, how do you know that measures that you're calling for, such as these better air conditioning units and dioxide testing, how do you know that they're going to be efficient and needed?
So item at a time, please. So I said, we do not want to go downhill without our foot on the brake pedal. That's what I said. Okay.
I know. You do realise that I can hear you, don't you? I am listening to what you're saying. I'm just challenging it because I don't want to share your view.
With respect to long COVID, it isn't something that you would gamble with, because it is real. People do get infected and people do have long COVID.
Well, I have
and with
long
respect
COVID.
to
I'm one of those people, Doctor. I have long COVID. I got very ill with COVID.
I'm not talking about you personally, Michelle. Let me talk about the population. Some people do have long COVID, and some people have generally very debilitating illnesses as a result of long COVID. Therefore, the best way to prevent long COVID is to not get infected in the first instance. The evidence for better ventilation, carbon dioxide monitoring, air filtration is aplenty. That in places where you have better ventilation, better air quality, you have fewer infections. So we need to have our children educated, and in the process of educating them, we also need to keep them safe. And because ventilation costs a lot of money, it is not being addressed.
Okay, Dr. Ravel, if I come back to you for the final point, anything to add?
Yes.
I mean, I've shared my perspective very clearly. I'm interested more in yours.
Yes, I think, again, I call this kind of a pro-treatment view, and I have complete respect for my colleague there and for what he's saying, but I do feel it's kind of a pro-treatment view. It's a view that only positive interventions are going to have a positive effect. And he talked about, ventilation systems and such like, and I agree, there's probably evidence that having good ventilation systems might reduce viral transmission. But what's the cost of that? What's the cost in money? What's the cost to businesses who are forced to install it, things like that? Now, the balance might fall in favour of doing those things, but in order for that balance to fall in that favour, there would have to be significant risk or proven risk that long COVID is going to be a problem, that infection rates are going to increase, those kind of things. And in the absence of that evidence, I don't feel it's right to subject the population of this country to further restrictions or infection control systems such as air filtration and whatever goes in place. I'm all in favour of any intervention that's shown on the balance of risk to be a very positive thing for all the people of this country. But you would have to demonstrate that for me to get behind it. And right now, I just don't feel there is the evidence for that. There's definitely evidence, I feel, for the harms that's being done by these restrictions. And I think the country now has an appetite towards moving back to normality. That's my personal opinion, Michelle.
Thank you. And Dr. Pankani, my final question to you, at what point do you think that we should be able then, if I finish on masks, to stop wearing masks when we're out and about?
I have said what I had to say about masks, which is that in crowded places where there is lots of human-to-human contact and interactions, under the rising tide of cases, which implies there's a rising tide of viral activity, you ought to wear your masks. When the case numbers drop and we know that we're getting fewer cases, we also know that there is no viral activity, it is not out in circulation, and at that point, there is no need to be wearing those masks.
Okay, Dr. Ravel, Dr. Pankani, thank you very much for your time. Joining me, sitting on the sofa, listening to that, I'm interested in your view. We have writer, broadcaster and campaigner and a peer of the realm, no less, Claire Fox, one of my favourite guests on the show, and one of my other favourite guests, the journalist and commentator, James Bloodworth. My views, I'm very clear on my views. I've just had enough of this, and I speak of someone that's had COVID, that's been impacted in many different ways, as we all have by COVID, and I still have long COVID today. And even with the perspective of having long COVID today, I still personally think enough now. And when I listen to that doctor, saying that we need to keep wearing masks until the viral load is reduced, how long is a piece of string? At what point does people say, right, OK, enough is enough? James, what's your view on this?
I'm in favour of the reopening, so-called Freedom Day on the 19th. I'll probably keep wearing a mask for a little longer on public transport, more out of courtesy for those people who haven't yet been vaccinated. Mm-hmm. Same as if I'm ill, if I feel unwell at all, I'll wear a mask. I think that's something that I would like to see stay. So if you have a cold or something and you go on public transport or in a crowded place, maybe it's wise to wear a mask just out of courtesy other people. But I think we do have to get back to normal. I think this idea that we have to just keep an eye on case numbers, I think that's wrong. I think we should look at hospitalizations and deaths. And I think we've... this idea of variants, I mean, this is going to always be with us. We have to vaccinate. We have to vaccinate and keep the pace up of vaccination. But the idea that variants will come along and remove immunity completely, that's not how evolution works. There'll be a chipping away at the vaccine, and that's why we'll see vaccines updated each year, just as we do with the flu jabs.
And Claire?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that strikes me is that over the weekend, since it became clear that the government is seriously considering properly opening up and in some ways talking about things that I'd hoped they'd have been doing before the alleged June Freedom Day, but they're actually now saying a lot of things that make sense in terms of the balance of risks and a more kind of a calm approach to this whole situation. Out of nowhere, I mean, I'm sure that we all noticed it on social media, let alone anyone that you might know, everybody became an expert on long COVID, and everybody started talking about the threat of long COVID. I mean, it's like the new COVID, as it were, right? It's like the new variant. And the reason I'm saying that is because it did feel that rather than a kind of rational discussion about what we need to do, there was another frightening prospect on the horizon. Now, I do know that there are people who particularly have had very serious bouts of COVID, who've actually been in intensive care units, can't walk without oxygen. I know other people with the symptoms. But this idea that we're all at risk from long COVID and that children are at risk, and it's frightening for people, if you say that. If you say to parents, if your kids get... Anyway, the point is, even if you contract and get a case of COVID, you are not guaranteed to get long COVID in a debilitating way.
No.
If the cases lead to very few hospitalisations and very few deaths, thank goodness that human ingenuity and modern medicine has allowed us ways out of this, that's given us an opportunity for freedom. We should be grateful and celebratory. And instead, there's a culture war around masks, which is frightening. And just to clarify on masks, I think your point about, being sensitive, I think is right. I think that I am of a mind to recognise that 16 months of this has locked the stuffing out a lot of people. And James and I were talking before, it's not that, you might want to say gung-ho, let's get out there, but I know that some people are hesitant and nervous and some people have lost the habit of just being in public life. And I don't want to be, I see some people on social media saying, sheeple, what's wrong with you, get on. And it's like, that's unhelpful too. I think that we want to encourage each other to go out there. But the thing that's frightening to me about masks, if I'm frightened of anything, is that the evidence is marginal in their efficacy in terms of keeping people safe.
Especially the ones that we want, the disposable things.
But I think even for other people... No, but I mean for other people. I don't even mean for oneself. I mean for other people as to whether they are saving other people. But I want to be generous about saying I want a bit of social solidarity and all that. But the irony is that people wear masks in different ways. There's marginal gain, potentially. But it's not the way that people are describing it, which is that if you don't wear a mask, you are a selfish libertarian lunatic letting it rip.
Well, I want
you
both to hold that thought, actually, because coming up a bit later on the show, this is one of the topics I want to talk to you about, because I do feel like we're hurtling towards, if we use that cheesy phrase of a culture war, but this whole kind of, we're so divided. Like, my view is, just get on with it. And I'm quite strident in that view, and it's kind of, there's so much stridency on the other side.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.